Your brother's the smart one. You're meant to support, not lead." My father's words cut through the elegant conference room like a blade, each syllable designed to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. I sat there, stunned, as he continued his announcement to the assembled board members and family. "Nathan will be taking over Brightfern Holdings and inheriting the $50 million trust fund that my mother established. My name is Juliet Whitmore, and I'm 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've lived in my younger brother's shadow." While Nathan received praise for every mediocre achievement, I was expected to smile, support, and stay silent. But this moment felt different. This wasn't just another family dinner where Dad lavished attention on his golden child. This was my entire future being handed away. The mahogany-paneled room fell silent, except for the soft scratching of the court reporter's pen. Nathan sat straighter in his chair, a smug smile spreading across his face as he accepted congratulations from the board members. At 29, he had always been Dad's favorite, the heir apparent who could do no wrong in Richard Whitmore's eyes. I watched him shake hands with our father, both of them beaming with satisfaction. "Juliet will continue in her current supportive role," Dad added, barely glancing in my direction. "She's always been good at the details, the behind-the-scenes work. That's where she belongs." I forced myself to clap politely, the sound hollow in my ears. Around the table, board members nodded approvingly, as if this outcome had been inevitable. Some avoided my gaze entirely, while others offered sympathetic smiles that only made the humiliation worse. But something flickered in the back of the room, a movement that caught my attention for just a moment before I returned my focus to the family celebration unfolding before me. Nathan was already discussing his vision for the company, his voice filled with the confidence that came from never having to prove himself. "I plan to expand our operations significantly," he declared, gesturing broadly. "We need to think bigger, take more risks." I bit my tongue, remembering the countless times his risk-taking had nearly cost us major contracts. But pointing that out now would only confirm Dad's assessment of me as a detail-oriented supporter rather than a visionary leader. So I sat there, hands folded in my lap, watching my brother accept an inheritance that should have been earned rather than simply given. The ominous feeling in my chest told me this moment would define everything that came next, though I had no idea just how dramatically the afternoon was about to change. Growing up in the Whitmore household meant learning early that opinions were not equally valued. Dad, Richard Whitmore, had built Brightfern Holdings from a small consulting firm into a regional powerhouse, and he ruled both the company and our family with the same iron fist. My mother, Patricia, had passed away when I was 15, leaving Dad to raise Nathan and me according to his rigid beliefs about gender roles and family hierarchy. "Nathan has the natural instincts for business," Dad would tell anyone who listened. "He thinks like an entrepreneur. Juliet is methodical, careful, perfect for supporting roles." It didn't matter that I had graduated summa cum laude from business school while Nathan barely scraped through with a C average. It didn't matter that I had spent the last 8 years working my way up through every department of our company, learning the business from the ground up. What mattered was that Nathan was the son, the chosen one, and I was just the daughter who happened to be good with spreadsheets. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Nathan attended networking events and played golf with potential clients, I was the one who actually kept the company running. I reviewed every major contract, caught the accounting errors that could have cost us millions, and quietly fixed the problems that Nathan's visionary thinking created. When the Henderson Group nearly pulled their account because Nathan had promised impossible deadlines, I was the one who worked through 3 weekends to salvage the relationship. When his aggressive expansion into the Phoenix market started hemorrhaging money, I developed the restructuring plan that turned it profitable. But Dad never saw any of that. He saw Nathan's charisma, his ability to command a room, his willingness to make bold decisions without getting bogged down in unnecessary details. What Dad failed to recognize was that those details were often the difference between success and catastrophe. Grandmother Eleanor had been different. Even before her death 6 months ago, she had asked pointed questions about the business, wanted to understand not just the vision, but the execution. She would corner me at family dinners, asking about specific projects, listening intently as I explained the challenges we were facing. Unlike Dad, she seemed genuinely interested in my perspective. "You have your grandmother's mind for business," she had told me during our last conversation. "She built the foundation that your father expanded upon. Never forget that, Juliet." I thought about those words now, as Nathan continued outlining his plans for the company. His ideas were bold, certainly, but they lacked the careful analysis that had made Brightfern Holdings successful. He talked about doubling our workforce within 2 years, expanding into 3 new markets simultaneously, and investing heavily in technology that he clearly didn't understand. The board members were nodding along, but I could see the concern in some of their eyes. These were smart people who understood business, and they could hear the same warning bells that were ringing in my head, but none of them would challenge the heir apparent, especially not in front of his father. A slight commotion in the back of the room caught my attention again, but when I looked, I saw only the familiar faces of our family attorney and her assistant. The humiliation settled over me like a familiar weight as Nathan basked in his moment of triumph. This wasn't the first time I had been relegated to the sidelines while he claimed credit and recognition, but it felt like the most definitive. $50 million in control of a company that I knew better than anyone, handed to someone whose biggest business achievement was not completely destroying the departments I had built. "I want to thank my father for believing in me," Nathan said, his voice carrying that practiced sincerity he had perfected over the years. "And of course, my sister Juliet for all her support. I know I can count on her to help me implement my vision." The words stung because they reduced 8 years of my career to a supporting role in his story. I had always known this day would come, but knowing and experiencing were entirely different things. Around the table, I saw the faces of people I had worked with, people who knew exactly how much I contributed to the company's success, and yet, not one of them would speak up. Corporate politics were more powerful than truth. "Juliet has always been the detail person," Dad continued, his tone suggesting this was somehow a compliment. "She'll make sure everything runs smoothly while Nathan focuses on the big picture." I wanted to remind him about the Morrison account, where my attention to detail had identified a contract loophole that saved us $3 million, or the restructuring of our Denver office that I had designed, which increased productivity by 30% while reducing overhead. But challenging Dad's narrative would only prove his point that I wasn't leadership material. Instead, I smiled and nodded, playing the role I had been assigned since childhood. "I'm excited to support Nathan's vision," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "The company means everything to our family." Nathan reached over and squeezed my shoulder in what was probably meant to be a brotherly gesture, but felt more like a reminder of his dominance. "That's what I love about Juliet," he said. "She's always been a team player." A team player. As if I hadn't been carrying the team for years while he took the credit. As if my ideas and innovations were just team playing, rather than leadership. The casual dismissal was almost worse than Dad's outright rejection of my capabilities. "Well, I think that concludes our business for today," Dad announced, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. "Nathan, we should discuss the transition timeline." As people began to gather their papers and prepare to leave, I caught sight of movement in the back corner again. Our family attorney, Victoria Collins, was standing near the door with what looked like a formal document in her hands. Her expression was serious, almost grim, and she seemed to be waiting for something. The feeling of dread in my stomach intensified, though I couldn't understand why. The worst had already happened, hadn't it? Just as Dad and Nathan began discussing transition plans, Victoria Collins cleared her throat loudly from the back of the room. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the authority that came from 30 years of legal practice. "Before we conclude, there's something important that needs to be addressed." The room fell silent. Victoria had been our family's attorney since before I was born, handling everything from corporate contracts to estate planning. She was not someone who interrupted meetings lightly, and the formal document in her hands suggested this was no minor administrative matter. "Victoria, what's this about?" Dad asked, his tone shifting from celebratory to concerned. "Can it wait? We're in the middle of—" "I'm afraid it cannot wait, Richard," Victoria interrupted, something she had never done in all the years I had known her. "This directly relates to the inheritance announcement you just made." Nathan's confident smile began to falter. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice higher than usual. "Everything's been settled. Grandmother's will was read 6 months ago." Victoria walked to the front of the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor with deliberate precision. Every board member was watching now, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. I felt my heart rate accelerate, though I couldn't understand why. "That's correct, Nathan. Your grandmother's original will was read 6 months ago," Victoria said, placing the document on the conference table. However, what was read was not her final will. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Dad's face had gone pale, and Nathan was staring at Victoria as if she had spoken in a foreign language. Around the table, board members exchanged confused glances, clearly as bewildered as I was. "I don't understand," Dad said slowly. "Mother's will was finalized years ago. She made her intentions clear. Your mother made an amendment to her will 3 weeks before her death," Victoria announced, her voice steady and professional. "She came to my office on January 15th and executed a codicil that significantly changed the inheritance structure." I felt the room spinning around me. January 15th was 2 days after Grandmother Eleanor had visited the office to review our quarterly reports. She had spent hours going through our financial statements, asking detailed questions about every department's performance. I had assumed it was just her usual thorough approach to understanding the business. "That's impossible," Nathan said, his voice cracking slightly. "She would have told us. She would have told Dad." Victoria opened the document with practiced efficiency. Eleanor Whitmore was very specific in her instructions. She wanted the amended will to remain sealed until the day the inheritance was formally announced to the company. She believed it would provide the most accurate assessment of how the family truly viewed both potential heirs. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Grandmother had been testing us. She had been watching how Dad treated Nathan and me, observing our actual contributions to the business, and making her final decision based on what she witnessed rather than what she had been told. "What does the amendment say?" Dad demanded, though his voice suggested he already feared the answer. Victoria looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. "The amendment designates Juliet Whitmore as the primary beneficiary of the $50 million trust fund and grants her controlling interest in Brightfern Holdings." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Nathan's face had gone from pale to ashen, and Dad was staring at Victoria as if she had just announced that gravity had stopped working. Around the table, board members were processing this information with the careful attention of people who understood that everything they thought they knew had just changed. "There must be some mistake," Nathan whispered, but even he seemed to know that Victoria Collins didn't make mistakes about legal documents. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to fully process what I had just heard. After 32 years of being told I wasn't smart enough, wasn't leadership material, wasn't the right choice, the one person whose opinion had built this company had chosen me. Victoria continued reading from the document, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore's amended will states, after careful observation of both my grandchildren's contributions to Brightfern Holdings, I have concluded that Juliet possesses the business acumen, attention to detail, and strategic thinking necessary to lead the company into the future." Nathan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The golden boy who had never been denied anything in his life was hearing for the first time that someone had found him lacking. Dad, meanwhile, had sunk into his chair as if the weight of this revelation was physically crushing him. Continue reading, I heard myself say, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Victoria nodded approvingly. While Nathan demonstrates enthusiasm and charisma, his decision-making has shown a pattern of costly errors that could jeopardize the company's future. The Henderson Group contract crisis, the failed Phoenix expansion strategy, and the near bankruptcy of our Denver office under his oversight have convinced me that leadership requires more than personality and good intentions. Each item Victoria listed was a carefully documented failure that I had quietly fixed. Grandmother had been watching more closely than any of us realized, and she had been keeping score. The Henderson contract that Nathan had nearly lost through impossible promises, I had salvaged it by renegotiating terms and working 3 consecutive weekends. The Phoenix expansion that hemorrhaged money for 8 months, I had developed the restructuring plan that turned it profitable. The Denver office crisis that could have destroyed us, I had identified the problems and implemented solutions, while Nathan was taking credit for bold leadership. Furthermore, Victoria continued, during my final visit to the offices, I observed that employees consistently turned to Juliet for guidance on complex problems, while Nathan's involvement typically required subsequent correction or clarification. This pattern suggests that the company's actual operational leadership already rests with Juliet, regardless of official titles or family expectations. I thought about that day in January when Grandmother had toured the offices. She had arrived unannounced, claiming she wanted to see how things really worked rather than getting a polished presentation. I had been surprised by how many employees she spoke with, how many questions she asked about daily operations. Now I understood she had been conducting an evaluation. "This is insane," Nathan finally exploded, his carefully maintained composure cracking completely. "I'm the one who's been groomed for this position. I'm the one Dad chose. You can't just change everything because of some last-minute document." "The document is legally binding," Victoria replied calmly. "Your grandmother had every right to modify her will, and she was of sound mind when she made these changes. I have the medical documentation to support her mental competency, as well as video testimony she recorded explaining her reasoning." Dad found his voice at last, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. "She recorded video testimony?" "She did. Eleanor wanted to ensure there could be no question about her intentions or her reasoning. She spent considerable time documenting the specific business decisions and outcomes that influenced her final choice." The room felt like it was tilting on its axis. Every assumption about our family, every belief about the future, every plan Nathan and Dad had made was crumbling in real time. I could see it in their faces. The dawning realization that Grandmother Eleanor had been watching, evaluating, and ultimately rejecting the narrative they had constructed about Nathan's inevitable succession. "In conclusion," Victoria read, "I leave control of Brightfern Holdings to Juliet because she has already demonstrated the leadership qualities necessary for the company's continued success. She has been leading without the title. Now she will have both the responsibility and the authority that her contributions have earned." The silence that followed Victoria's final words was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was the sound of everything Nathan and Dad believed about themselves, about our family, about the natural order of things, collapsing all at once. Nathan was the first to react, standing so abruptly that his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising to a pitch I hadn't heard since we were children. "I've been preparing for this my entire life. Everyone knows I'm the heir. You can't just change that because of some last-minute manipulation." "Nathan," Victoria said firmly, "your grandmother was not manipulated. She spent months observing the business operations before making her decision. This wasn't impulsive. It was the result of careful evaluation." Dad finally spoke, his voice hollow. When did Mother start having doubts about Nathan?" Victoria consulted her notes. "According to my records, Eleanor first requested a review of her estate planning in September, about a month after the Henderson Group crisis. She said she wanted to reassess whether her original assumptions about succession were accurate. The Henderson Group crisis. That was when Nathan had promised a client we could deliver a comprehensive market analysis in 2 weeks, a project that typically took 6 weeks. When the client threatened to cancel their contract, Dad had praised Nathan for being aggressive and thinking outside the box. What Dad hadn't known was that I had spent every night for 2 weeks creating a modified analysis that satisfied the client's timeline while maintaining our quality standards. "She never said anything," Dad whispered. "She never indicated she was reconsidering." Eleanor specifically requested discretion. She wanted to observe the family dynamics without influencing behavior. She felt that announcing her intentions to reconsider would compromise the authenticity of her evaluation. I thought about all those family dinners over the past months, all the times Grandmother had asked me detailed questions about work, while Dad and Nathan discussed Nathan's future plans. I had assumed she was just making conversation, but now I realized she had been conducting job interviews. Nathan began pacing the length of the room, his hands clenched into fists. There has to be a way to contest this. Undue influence, mental incompetence, something. People don't just change their minds about inheritance after decades. They do when they learn new information, Victoria replied. Eleanor documented extensively. She kept records of specific business decisions, their outcomes, and who was actually responsible for both the failures and the successes. The pattern she identified was quite clear. "What pattern?" Dad asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to understand. Victoria looked directly at me before answering. That while Nathan received credit for leadership, Juliet was consistently the one solving problems, preventing disasters, and ensuring the company's actual success. Eleanor concluded that effective leadership was already happening. It just wasn't being recognized or rewarded. The truth of those words hit the room like a physical force. Every board member present had witnessed this dynamic. They had seen Nathan make bold announcements and watched me quietly handle the implementation. They had attended meetings where Nathan's vision was praised and observed me working late into the night to make those visions actually work. Furthermore, Victoria continued, Eleanor was particularly concerned about Nathan's financial projections for future expansion. She had your CFO review his proposals independently and found them to be, in her words, dangerously optimistic and inadequately researched. I remembered those proposals. Nathan wanted to expand into 4 new markets simultaneously, double our workforce within 18 months, and invest in technology systems that would cost more than our annual profit. When I had quietly mentioned my concerns to Dad, he had dismissed them as typical Juliet overthinking. But Grandmother had been listening. Victoria reached into her briefcase and withdrew another document. "There's one more thing," she announced. Eleanor also left specific instructions for the transition of power. Nathan stopped pacing and stared at her. What kind of instructions? She was aware that this revelation would be shocking to the family. She wanted to ensure that the transition would be smooth and professional, with minimal disruption to business operations. Victoria opened the second document. Effective immediately, Juliet assumes the role of Chief Executive Officer of Brightfern Holdings. Nathan will retain his current position as Director of Business Development, reporting directly to Juliet. The room erupted. Nathan's face turned red as he processed the reality that he would now be working for the sister he had always considered his subordinate. Dad looked like he was having trouble breathing, his carefully constructed worldview crumbling before his eyes. "This is insane," Nathan shouted. "I won't work for her. I won't report to someone who's been my assistant." "I was never your assistant," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since Victoria had begun reading. "I was cleaning up your mistakes." The simple truth of that statement silenced him more effectively than any shout could have. Around the table, board members were nodding slightly, finally acknowledging what they had all known, but never said aloud. Victoria continued reading. Eleanor has also established a performance review system. Nathan's continued employment and any future profit sharing will depend on demonstrated improvement in his decision-making and collaborative skills, as evaluated by Juliet and the board of directors. Collaborative skills? Nathan's voice cracked. She's my sister, not my boss. Actually, I said, standing for the first time since this meeting began, I am both. And your first collaborative challenge will be explaining to the Henderson Group why your promised delivery timeline nearly cost us their contract. Dad finally found his voice. Juliet, surely you don't intend to actually hold my brother accountable for his decisions? I interrupted. Yes, Dad, I absolutely do. Starting with a comprehensive review of every project he's managed in the past 2 years. The devastation on Nathan's face was almost satisfying. For the first time in his life, he was experiencing consequences for his actions, instead of having them quietly cleaned up by someone else. Dad looked equally stunned, finally confronting the reality that his assessment of our capabilities had been not just wrong, but dangerously misguided. The board will need time to process this information, said Margaret Chen, our longest-serving board member. But I think it's important to note that this transition actually formalizes what many of us have observed for years. Other board members began nodding agreement. Juliet has been the operational backbone of this company, added James Park, our chief financial officer. This decision recognizes existing reality rather than creating a new one. Nathan looked around the room desperately, searching for support that clearly wasn't coming. You're all just going to accept this? You're going to let her destroy everything we've built? What we've built? I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Nathan, name one successful project you've completed without my involvement. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Nathan struggled to respond. Finally, he turned to Dad with pleading eyes. Are you going to let her talk to me like this? Dad looked older than I had ever seen him, the weight of his misjudgment clearly overwhelming. I think, he said slowly, your grandmother knew things about this business that I missed. Victoria began collecting her documents. The transition will be effective immediately. Eleanor also requested that I remind everyone that Brightfern Holdings has always succeeded because of careful planning and attention to detail, not just vision and charisma. Grandmother Eleanor had the final word after all, even from the grave. She had watched, evaluated, and chosen competence over favoritism. The daughter who was meant to support, not lead, was now in charge of everything. The Golden Boy's reign had ended before it ever truly began, and everyone in the room knew it. In the months following the inheritance revelation, Nathan's reputation crumbled both within the company and throughout the business community. Word spread quickly about how the heir apparent had been passed over in favor of his supposedly supporting sister, leading clients and competitors to question every decision he had ever made. His attempts to find executive positions elsewhere were consistently derailed when reference checks revealed the true circumstances of his inheritance loss and the pattern of costly mistakes that had convinced his own grandmother to choose his sister instead. Richard faced his own professional humiliation as colleagues learned that his assessment of his children's capabilities had been so fundamentally flawed that his own mother had felt compelled to intervene from the grave, leaving him to confront decades of favoritism that had nearly damaged the family business irreparably. As I reviewed our latest quarterly reports showing record profits under my leadership, I reflected on how Grandmother Eleanor's quiet observation had validated years of unrecognized work and proven that true leadership often comes from those who are busy solving problems rather than claiming credit. The revenge I had unknowingly earned was sweeter than anything I could have planned. The ultimate vindication that competence and dedication matter more than favoritism and assumed inheritance rights. Jessica, what is this ridiculous thing still doing in your room? My dad Vincent bellowed, pointing at my ceramic pig bank sitting on my dresser. You're 22 years old, not 12. It's embarrassing. I felt my stomach drop as I watched him pick up the bank that had been my most prized possession for the past 10 years. The weight of it told the story of countless birthdays, Christmas gifts, babysitting money, and part-time job earnings all carefully saved since I was 12 years old. Every coin and bill represented a step closer to my dream of starting my own business after college graduation next month. Dad, please be careful with that. I've been saving that money for my business startup, I said, trying to keep my voice steady while panic rose in my chest. Business? He laughed harshly. You mean that silly online store idea you keep talking about? Jessica, you need to grow up and face reality. Your sister Rachel is the one with real academic potential in this family. The familiar sting of comparison hit me like it always did. Rachel, my 19-year-old sister, was the golden child who could do no wrong in Vincent's eyes. She was pursuing her junior year in communications at an expensive private university, while I had worked my way through state school with a business degree, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working 20 hours a week at a local coffee shop. That money represents years of savings, Dad. I've calculated exactly how much I need for inventory, website development, and initial marketing costs, I explained, reaching out protectively toward my piggy bank. Vincent's expression darkened in a way that made my blood run cold. I had seen this look before, usually right before he made decisions that would benefit Rachel at my expense. The ceramic pig suddenly seemed fragile in his large hands, and I noticed how his knuckles had turned white from gripping it so tightly. You know what your problem is, Jessica? You dream too big for someone with your limitations. Rachel has already been accepted to graduate school, while you're playing with toy banks and fantasy businesses. The dismissive tone in his voice cut deeper than any physical blow could have. I watched helplessly as he examined my life savings, turning the bank over in his hands like he was evaluating its worth. The afternoon sunlight streaming through my bedroom window seemed to dim as an ominous feeling settled in my chest. Something terrible was about to happen, and I could sense it in every fiber of my being. But I was powerless to stop whatever Vincent had already decided to do. Growing up in our house in Portland, Oregon, I learned early that Vincent operated by a clear hierarchy. Rachel first, his own needs second, and me somewhere far down the list. My mother had passed away when I was 8, leaving Vincent to raise 2 daughters with vastly different treatment. While Rachel received private tutoring, dance lessons, and the latest clothes, I learned to be grateful for hand-me-downs and public school education. The piggy bank had been my mother's last gift to me before she died. "Save your pennies, sweetheart," she had whispered during one of her final hospital visits. Dreams require preparation, and preparation requires patience. I had taken her words to heart, depositing every spare dollar into that ceramic pig for the past 10 years. My business plan wasn't some childish fantasy, despite what Vincent believed. I had spent 2 years researching e-commerce trends, studying successful online retailers, and developing a comprehensive strategy for selling handmade jewelry and accessories. The $23,478 in my piggy bank represented the exact amount I needed to purchase initial inventory, build a professional website, and cover 3 months of operating expenses while establishing my customer base. Rachel, meanwhile, had never shown interest in entrepreneurship or financial responsibility. She spent money as quickly as Vincent provided it, always expecting another deposit into her checking account whenever she called home claiming some urgent need. Her Instagram feed showcased expensive sorority events, designer handbags, and luxury spring break trips, all funded by our father's indulgence of her every whim. "Dad, I've already contacted suppliers and identified my target market," I continued, hoping to break through his skepticism. "This isn't just a dream. It's a calculated business venture with realistic profit projections." Vincent set the piggy bank down on my desk with a heavy thud that made my heart skip. "Jessica, you're living in a fantasy world. Real success comes from education and connections, not playing store on the internet. Rachel understands this, which is why she's focusing on her graduate school applications instead of chasing get-rich-quick schemes." The way he said "playing store" made my face burn with humiliation. I had worked harder than Rachel ever had, maintaining excellent grades while supporting myself financially throughout college. Every dollar in that bank represented hours of real work, real sacrifice, and real planning for my future. I should have recognized the warning signs in Vincent's dismissive tone and the calculating look in his eyes. I should have hidden my savings somewhere safer than a ceramic pig sitting openly on my dresser. But I trusted that even Vincent, despite his favoritism, wouldn't actually steal from his own daughter. I trusted that family meant something, even in our dysfunctional household. That trust was about to cost me everything I had worked for, but it would ultimately teach me lessons about resilience and determination that no amount of money could have provided. 3 days later, I came home from my final college exam to find Vincent waiting in the living room with both Rachel and my piggy bank. The ceramic pig sat on our coffee table like evidence in a courtroom, and I immediately knew something catastrophic had happened. Rachel was practically bouncing with excitement, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that usually meant she was getting something expensive. "Jessica, sit down. We need to discuss your future," Vincent said, his tone carrying the false authority he used when making pronouncements he knew would upset me. My legs felt weak as I lowered myself onto the couch across from them. The piggy bank looked smaller somehow, less significant, as if Vincent's presence had already diminished its importance. Rachel kept glancing between the bank and me with barely contained glee, like she was watching her favorite movie approach the best scene. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding your business idea," Vincent began, and for one foolish moment, I felt hope bloom in my chest. Maybe he had reconsidered. Maybe he finally understood how seriously I had planned this venture. "Rachel needs additional funding for graduate school applications and her final semester expenses. The application fees alone are substantial, and she'll need money for interview travel and professional clothing." The hope in my chest transformed into ice-cold dread. I watched Vincent's hands move toward my piggy bank, and every instinct screamed at me to grab it and run. But I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening fast enough to react. "No," I whispered, finally finding my voice. "Dad, that's my money. I've been saving it for 10 years. Jessica, family means supporting each other. Rachel's education is an investment in our family's future. Your online store idea is a risk we can't afford to take right now." Without another word, Vincent picked up my ceramic pig and raised it above his head. The sound it made when it hit our hardwood floor will haunt me forever. A sharp crack, followed by the musical scatter of years' worth of coins and bills across our living room. Rachel clapped her hands together like she was watching fireworks. I dropped to my knees, frantically trying to gather the scattered money, while Vincent calmly explained that this was for the best, and I would understand when I was older. My hands shook as I collected crumpled 20s and rolled quarters, watching Rachel count out bills with the efficiency of someone who had been expecting this windfall. $23,478. Every penny I had earned, saved, and dreamed over. Gone in 30 seconds of Vincent's selfishness and Rachel's greed. As I knelt on our living room floor, surrounded by ceramic shards and my destroyed dreams, I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Instead, I quietly began planning exactly how I would make them both regret this moment for the rest of their lives. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity that surprised me. Instead of the devastation I expected to feel, I found myself analyzing the situation like a business problem that needed solving. Vincent had always underestimated my determination, and Rachel had grown so comfortable with unearned rewards that she never questioned whether she deserved them. These character flaws would become the foundation of their downfall. I spent that first day calling everyone I knew who might lend me money. My college roommate Maya agreed to loan me $800 from her summer job savings. My former manager at the coffee shop, Patricia, offered me $1,500 after I explained my situation. My Aunt Caroline, who had never liked Vincent's treatment of me, surprised me by offering $3,000 with no interest and no deadline for repayment. "Your mother would be ashamed of Vincent's behavior," Aunt Caroline said over the phone, her voice tight with anger. "She always believed you had more drive than Rachel, and she'd want you to succeed despite your father's cruelty." Within a week, I had secured $7,500 in loans from friends and family members who believed in my potential more than my own father did. It wasn't the full amount I needed, but it was enough to begin. I also applied for 3 business credit cards, carefully calculating exactly how much debt I could manage while living in my childhood bedroom and working full-time. Vincent watched my activities with amused condescension. Still chasing that internet store dream, Jessica? I thought breaking your piggy bank would help you see reality. I'm just exploring options, I replied calmly, refusing to let him see how his words affected me. Let him think I was giving up. Let him believe he had successfully crushed my ambitions. His assumptions about my defeat would make my eventual success even more satisfying. Rachel, meanwhile, had already spent half of my stolen money on a designer wardrobe for her graduate school interviews. She paraded around the house in expensive blazers and shoes, posting Instagram photos with captions about investing in my future and grateful for family support. Each post felt like salt in an open wound, but I screenshot every one of them for future reference. I moved my base of operations to the local library, spending 12 hours a day researching suppliers, building my website, and developing marketing strategies. Without the comfort of my planned budget, I had to become more creative and resourceful than I ever imagined possible. I learned to negotiate better deals with wholesalers, discovered free marketing channels I hadn't previously considered, and developed cost-cutting strategies that would actually make my business more profitable in the long run. My first order of inventory arrived 2 weeks after Vincent destroyed my piggy bank. 24 sets of handmade silver earrings, 43 necklaces, and 67 bracelets, all carefully selected from 3 different artisan suppliers who agreed to extended payment terms in exchange for exclusive online distribution rights. I photographed each piece using natural light from my bedroom window, wrote compelling product descriptions, and launched my website on a Tuesday morning in June. Vincent discovered my activities when packages started arriving at our house. Jessica, what is all this junk? I thought we agreed you were giving up this nonsense. We never agreed to anything, I replied, carefully unpacking a shipment of velvet jewelry pouches. You stole my money and gave it to Rachel. I never agreed that was acceptable. His face darkened with the familiar anger I had learned to navigate carefully. Don't use that tone with me, young lady. I'm trying to help you avoid making costly mistakes. But I was no longer the passive daughter who accepted his decisions without question. Vincent's theft had burned away my need for his approval, leaving behind something harder and more focused than he had ever seen from me. I was no longer trying to please him or prove myself worthy of equal treatment. I was simply determined to build something he couldn't destroy, no matter what it cost me. My first sale came 3 days after launching the website. A woman in Seattle purchased 2 pairs of silver earrings for $68, and I felt more pride in that transaction than I had ever felt about any grade or achievement in my entire life. This money was mine, earned through my own effort and vision, untouchable by Vincent's favoritism or Rachel's entitlement. The orders started slowly, $5 here, $30 there. But each sale validated my business model and proved Vincent wrong about online retail being a fantasy. I reinvested every penny of profit back into inventory, gradually expanding my product line and building relationships with additional suppliers who offered unique pieces I couldn't find anywhere else. Rachel, meanwhile, was struggling with her graduate school applications despite having my stolen money to fund her efforts. I overheard her crying to Vincent about rejection letters and failed interviews, complaining that other candidates seemed more prepared and motivated than she was. Vincent consoled her by promising additional funding for application consultants and interview coaching, apparently believing that money could solve problems that required actual effort and talent. Maybe I should take a gap year, Rachel suggested during one of these conversations. I could use the time to build my resume and gain more experience. Absolutely not, Vincent replied firmly. You're not going to waste this opportunity like your sister wasted hers. We invested too much in your education to let you give up now. His words revealed how he viewed both of his daughters, Rachel as an investment that needed to pay off, and me as a write-off who had already failed to meet his expectations. This transactional approach to parenting would eventually cost him relationships with both of us, but at the time, I was grateful for his clarity about where I stood. By August, my online store was generating consistent daily sales. I had developed a social media presence that attracted customers from across the country, and several fashion bloggers had featured my jewelry in their posts. Most importantly, I had proven to myself that I could build something meaningful from nothing, using only determination and creativity as my primary resources. Vincent noticed my success reluctantly, making dismissive comments whenever packages arrived or customers called our house phone with questions. "I suppose you're making a few dollars with your little hobby," he said one evening, unable to completely ignore the evidence of my growing business. "It's not a hobby, Dad. It's a legitimate company with real customers and actual profits." Don't get carried away, Jessica. A few online sales don't constitute a real business. Wait until you face serious competition or economic challenges. But I had already faced the biggest challenge of all, starting over after losing everything I had worked for. Vincent's theft had forced me to develop resilience and resourcefulness that no amount of saved money could have provided. I was no longer the naive young woman who trusted family members with her dreams. I had become someone who expected obstacles and planned for setbacks, someone who viewed every problem as an opportunity to become stronger and more independent. The transformation wasn't just financial. I was sleeping better, standing straighter, and speaking with confidence I had never possessed before. People responded to this new version of myself differently. Customers trusted my product recommendations, suppliers respected my professionalism, and even strangers seemed to take me more seriously. Vincent's cruelty had accidentally created exactly the kind of person who could build a successful business despite limited resources and family opposition. As autumn approached, I began planning the revelation that would show Vincent and Rachel exactly what their theft had cost them, and what it had ultimately created in me. By November, my business was generating more monthly revenue than my old coffee shop job had provided in 3 months. I had expanded beyond jewelry to include handmade scarves, artisan soaps, and custom gift boxes, all sourced from small businesses across the Pacific Northwest. My customer base had grown to over 2,000 people, and my website traffic was increasing by 15% each month. The success was intoxicating, but it also highlighted how completely Vincent had misjudged both of his daughters. While my business thrived, Rachel had been rejected from 5 of her 6 graduate school applications. The one acceptance came from a program that required substantial additional funding beyond what Vincent had already provided from my stolen savings. "I don't understand what's happening," Vincent confided to his brother during a phone conversation I overheard from the kitchen. "Rachel interviewed well and her test scores were decent, but these schools keep choosing other candidates. Meanwhile, Jessica is constantly receiving packages and making phone calls about her internet business. I'm starting to wonder if I made the right decision about that piggy bank money." His doubt came too late to change anything, but it revealed that even Vincent was beginning to recognize the pattern of consequences his favoritism had created. Rachel's failures weren't just bad luck or temporary setbacks. They were the predictable result of a lifetime of unearned rewards and inflated expectations. I decided it was time to force the conversation that Vincent had been avoiding. On a Saturday morning in December, I asked both him and Rachel to sit down for a family meeting. Rachel assumed I wanted to discuss Christmas plans or household responsibilities, but Vincent looked suspicious, as if he sensed something significant was coming. "I want to show you something," I began, opening my laptop to display my business dashboard. "These are my sales figures for the past 6 months. The screen showed gross revenue of $47,000, with net profits of $19,000 after inventory costs and business expenses." Vincent's eyes widened as he processed the numbers, while Rachel leaned forward to read the figures with obvious surprise. "This can't be accurate," Vincent said slowly. "You started this business with borrowed money after the piggy bank situation. How did you generate this much revenue so quickly?" "The same way I saved $23,000 over 10 years, I replied calmly. "Through consistent effort, careful planning, and refusing to give up when obstacles appeared." Rachel's face had gone pale as she began to understand the implications of what I was showing them. "But I thought your business was just a hobby. You never said you were making real money." "I learned not to share important information with people who might use it against me," I said, looking directly at Vincent. "Some family members can't be trusted with other people's dreams or financial resources." Vincent struggled to find words that could address the enormous miscalculation he was beginning to recognize. Jessica, if I had known you could actually build something this successful, I might have made different decisions about your savings. No, Dad. You wouldn't have. You made your decision based on who you believed Rachel and I were, not on who we actually are or what we were capable of achieving. Rachel has spent my money on clothes and parties while failing to gain admission to graduate school. I built a business that generates more monthly profit than most people's salaries. The difference isn't luck or timing, it's character. The silence that followed was heavy with implications none of us wanted to address directly. Vincent was facing the reality that his favoritism had funded failure while sabotaging success. Rachel was confronting evidence that unearned money couldn't substitute for genuine ability or effort. And I was finally ready to reveal the full extent of what their theft had ultimately cost them. I have an announcement to make, I continued, pulling up another screen on my laptop that showed projections for the coming year. Next month, I'll be featured in Pacific Northwest Business Magazine as one of their Rising Entrepreneurs Under 25. The article focuses on how I built a successful e-commerce business with minimal startup capital and innovative marketing strategies. Vincent's face went completely white as the implications hit him. Jessica, what exactly will this article say about your startup funding? The truth, I replied simply, that I began with $7,500 in loans from friends and family after my father destroyed my life savings and gave every penny to my sister for her failed graduate school applications. The reporter was particularly interested in how adversity can sometimes create stronger entrepreneurs than comfortable circumstances would have produced. Rachel made a small choking sound. You told a journalist about the piggy bank? About Dad giving me your money? The story resonated with the magazine's editor because it demonstrates how determination can overcome family betrayal. They're planning to use it as their cover story for the February issue, with the headline, From Broken Dreams to Business Success, How One Young Woman Turned Family Theft into Entrepreneurial Triumph. Vincent stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger and panic. You can't publish something like that, Jessica. It will destroy our family's reputation. People will think I'm a terrible father. People will think exactly what the evidence shows them to think. I responded calmly. I'm not publishing lies or exaggerations. I'm sharing the documented truth about what happened and how I responded to it. The reporter had been fascinated by my story, especially the details about Vincent's favoritism and Rachel's waste of my stolen money. She had verified the timeline of events, reviewed my business records, and even interviewed several of the friends who had loaned me startup funds after my savings were stolen. The article would be comprehensive, factual, and devastating to Vincent's reputation in our community. This is revenge, Vincent said quietly, sinking back into his chair with the defeated posture of someone who finally understood the consequences of his actions. This is success, I corrected him. Revenge would be doing something to hurt you. Success is building something you can't destroy, no matter how much you want to. The article was published on a Tuesday morning in February, exactly 2 years after Vincent had smashed my piggy bank. By noon, our phone was ringing constantly with calls from neighbors, family friends, and Vincent's business associates who had read the story. Pacific Northwest Business Magazine had a circulation of over 50,000 readers, and the online version was being shared extensively on social media platforms. Vincent's face crumpled as he read his own words quoted in the article. Dreams require realistic expectations, and Jessica needed to focus on practical goals instead of fantasy businesses. The contrast between his dismissive statement and my actual business success made his judgment appear both cruel and spectacularly wrong. Rachel had locked herself in her bedroom after discovering that the article included specific details about how she had spent my stolen money on sorority fees, designer clothing, and spring break trips, instead of the educational purposes Vincent had claimed to support. Her Instagram posts were screenshot and included as evidence of the frivolous spending that my savings had funded while I struggled to rebuild from nothing. I never imagined it would be this public, Vincent said, holding a printed copy of the magazine with my photograph on the cover. Jessica, I was trying to help Rachel succeed. I thought you would find another way to pursue your goals. You were trying to help your favorite daughter at the expense of your other daughter, I replied. The publicity is just people learning the truth about what kind of father and what kind of sister I was dealing with. My phone rang with congratulations from customers, suppliers, and other entrepreneurs who had read the article. Several business owners offered partnership opportunities, and 3 different venture capital firms expressed interest in providing funding for my expansion plans. Vincent's theft had accidentally launched me into exactly the kind of success he had never believed I could achieve. The revenge was complete, and it tasted better than I had ever imagined it would. Vincent's standing in the Portland business community collapsed within weeks of the magazine article's publication. His insurance agency lost several major clients, who questioned his judgment and character, after learning how he had sabotaged one daughter's legitimate business dreams to fund another daughter's irresponsible spending habits. Professional colleagues who had respected his opinions began excluding him from industry discussions and networking events, while neighbors avoided him at community gatherings. Rachel faced social humiliation when her sorority sisters and university classmates discovered she had been funding her lifestyle with money stolen from her sister's decade-long savings effort. She was forced to withdraw from her one graduate school acceptance when Vincent could no longer afford the additional funding, and her reputation among peers was permanently tainted by the public revelation of her role in the family's financial betrayal. Both father and daughter found themselves isolated from the community respect and social connections they had previously taken for granted, learning too late that reputation, once destroyed, could never be fully restored. As I celebrated reaching $100,000 in annual revenue from my expanded online business, I reflected on how Vincent's betrayal had forced me to develop the resilience and creativity that made my success more meaningful than any inheritance or family support could have provided. The journey had taught me that authentic achievement comes not from others' approval or resources, but from the determination to build something valuable, despite every obstacle placed in your path, and I wouldn't trade that hard-earned wisdom for all the piggy bank money in the world. She's worthless. She can't even afford this dinner. Bethany's voice rang out across the dining room, her words hitting me like a slap across the face. The entire family erupted in laughter, their voices blending into a cruel symphony that made my stomach churn. I sat there at the Thanksgiving table in Phoenix, Arizona, watching my sister bask in the attention she always craved, while I became the punchline of her joke once again. My name is Jennifer Collins. I'm 29 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life being the family disappointment. At least, that's what they all believed. While Bethany received endless praise for her mediocre marketing job and constant financial bailouts from our parents, I had learned to keep my mouth shut and my head down. The modest apartment I rented, the used Honda I drove, and the simple clothes I wore painted a picture of struggle that my family was all too eager to accept. "Jennifer, honey, we know things have been tough for you," my mother said, with that pitying tone I had grown to despise. "Maybe after dinner, your father and I can discuss helping you with some bills." The condescension dripped from her words like honey from a broken jar. Bethany smirked from across the table, clearly delighted that she remained the golden child who could do no wrong. I looked around the table at my family, my parents, my brother Tyler, my Aunt Patricia, and of course Bethany. All of them so certain they knew my story. They saw my quiet demeanor and simple lifestyle, and assumed I was failing at life. What they didn't know was that 5 years earlier, while they were mocking my decision to quit my corporate job, I had begun making investments that would change everything. But I had kept that secret locked away, watching and waiting as they continued to treat me like I was nothing more than a burden. "The thing is," Bethany continued, clearly not done with her performance, "some people just aren't cut out for success. Jennifer's always been the type to make poor decisions." She gestured dramatically toward my plain sweater and jeans. "I mean, look at her. She probably couldn't even pay for gas to get here tonight." The laughter started again, and I felt something shift inside me. For years I had endured their mockery, their assumptions, their complete dismissal of my worth. I had told myself I was taking the high road by not flaunting what I had built in secret. But sitting there, watching Bethany tear me down for sport while my parents smiled approvingly. I realized the high road had only led to more abuse. Perhaps it was time to show them exactly how wrong they had been about everything. The story of my transformation had begun 5 years earlier, though my family would never have recognized it as such. Back then, I was working at Henderson Marketing Group, climbing the corporate ladder and following the path everyone expected me to take. But late at night, after long days of creating campaigns for products I didn't care about, I found myself researching something that genuinely fascinated me: cryptocurrency. While my coworkers spent their evenings watching television or going to bars, I was learning about blockchain technology, studying market patterns, and understanding the revolutionary potential of digital currencies. Bitcoin was still relatively unknown to mainstream investors, trading at just a few $100s per coin. Ethereum was even newer, with most people having never heard of it at all. I started small, investing $500 here and there from my modest salary. My family, when they bothered to ask about my interests at all, would roll their eyes when I mentioned cryptocurrency. "Jennifer's getting into another one of her weird hobbies," Bethany would say with a dismissive wave. "Remember when she thought she was going to become a professional photographer? This is just the latest phase." But it wasn't a phase. While they were convinced I was wasting my time and money, I was methodically building a portfolio that would eventually dwarf their wildest dreams. I researched every investment, studied market trends, and learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when to buy and when to hold. When Bitcoin hit $1,000, I bought more. When it dropped to $800, I bought even more. The real breakthrough came when I discovered several altcoins early in their development. I put $10,000 into a project called Chainlink when it was trading at 20 cents per token. I invested another $15,000 in Solana when nobody had ever heard of it. These weren't lucky guesses. They were calculated investments based on months of research into the technology and the teams behind these projects. My family never understood my decision to leave Henderson Marketing Group and work as a freelance consultant. They saw it as another sign of my inability to commit to success, another example of how I couldn't handle the pressure of a real job. What they didn't know was that my freelance income, while modest, was more than enough to cover my simple lifestyle, while allowing me to reinvest every spare dollar into my growing cryptocurrency portfolio. "She's never going to amount to anything," I overheard my father telling Tyler during last Christmas dinner. "Bethany has her head on straight, but Jennifer just can't seem to find her way." They spoke about me like I wasn't sitting right there, like my feelings didn't matter. I smiled and nodded and continued eating my turkey, all while knowing that my portfolio had crossed the $2 million mark just the week before. Now, sitting at this Thanksgiving table, while Bethany performed her usual routine of tearing me down to build herself up, I realized I was tired of being their scapegoat. Perhaps it was time for them to learn what I had really been doing all these years. The moment that changed everything happened 3 weeks before this Thanksgiving dinner. I was sitting in my small apartment, checking my portfolio as I did every morning with my coffee, when I saw numbers that made my hands shake. Bitcoin had reached new all-time highs, Ethereum had surged beyond anything experts had predicted, and my early investments in Chainlink and Solana had increased by over 3,000%. But it was the notification from my newest investment, a cryptocurrency project I had bought into just 6 months earlier, that truly took my breath away. The project had just been acquired by a major tech company for 12 times its market value. Overnight, my modest $50,000 investment had become worth $600,000. When I calculated the total value of my portfolio, the number seemed impossible: $12.3 million. I stared at the screen for a full 10 minutes, refreshing the page again and again to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I had become a multimillionaire while living in a one-bedroom apartment and driving a car I had bought used 5 years earlier. I had accumulated generational wealth while my family pitied me and treated me like a charity case. The irony was so profound it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I felt a deep sadness settle over me as I realized what this meant. All those years of Bethany's cruelty, all those moments when my parents had looked at me with disappointment, All those times when Tyler had avoided including me in conversations because he was embarrassed by his unsuccessful sister. None of it had been about my actual worth or potential. It had all been about their assumptions, their need to have someone to look down on, their comfort with casting me as the family failure. But the sadness was quickly replaced by something else. Anger. Not the explosive kind that would make me lash out, but the cold, calculated anger that comes from finally understanding exactly how little your family thinks of you. For 5 years, I had been building something extraordinary, while they dismissed me as worthless. For 5 years, I had been proving myself in ways they couldn't even comprehend while they questioned my intelligence and capabilities. The worst part wasn't even the money they had refused to believe I could earn. It was the respect they had refused to give me regardless of my achievements. Bethany made $45,000 a year at her marketing job and acted like she was running a Fortune 500 company. She had never saved more than a few $1,000s in her life, yet she felt qualified to lecture me about financial responsibility. My parents had been subsidizing her lifestyle for years, paying her credit card bills and covering her car payments, yet somehow I was the one they worried about. As I sat there looking at my balance, I made a decision. I would give them one more chance to show me who they really were. And if they chose cruelty over kindness, if they chose to humiliate me instead of simply letting me exist peacefully, then they would finally learn what they had been overlooking all these years. The 3 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving had been a carefully orchestrated performance on my part. I continued my routine of checking my portfolio every morning, but now I was also preparing for what might be my final interaction with my family as they knew me. The numbers kept growing. 12.5 million, then 12.8 million, as the cryptocurrency market continued its unprecedented surge. During those weeks, I received the usual pattern of communication from my family. Bethany called twice, both times to complain about her job and ask if I had heard of any opportunities in my field, though she never bothered to ask what my field actually was. Tyler texted occasionally, usually forwarding memes or asking if I wanted to grab lunch, though he never followed through when I said yes. My parents called once to remind me about Thanksgiving and to subtly suggest I might want to dress up a little for the occasion. "We know you don't have much, sweetheart," my mother had said during that call. "But maybe you could borrow something nice from a friend. Aunt Patricia will be there, and she always asks about you kids." The implication was clear. They were embarrassed by me and wanted me to at least pretend to be successful for the extended family. I spent those weeks watching my family's social media posts with new eyes. Bethany shared photos of her modest apartment like it was a mansion, posted pictures of her $24,000 Honda like it was a luxury vehicle, and constantly humble bragged about her amazing career that barely paid enough to cover her expenses. Tyler shared posts about his weekend activities: dinner at chain restaurants, trips to the local mall, nights at sports bars, all while portraying himself as living his best life. My parents, meanwhile, constantly shared articles about financial responsibility and the importance of hard work, usually accompanied by comments about how some people just don't understand the value of $1. The passive-aggressive nature of their posts wasn't lost on me. They wanted the world to know they had raised one successful daughter and one disappointment, and they weren't subtle about which was which. The irony became even more pronounced when I did some research into my family's actual financial situation. Public records showed that my parents had taken out a home equity loan 2 years earlier, likely to cover Bethany's credit card debts and Tyler's student loans. They were leveraging their own retirement security to maintain the illusion that their golden children were successful, while treating me like I was the financial burden. As Thanksgiving approached, I made some strategic decisions. I bought a simple dress from Target. Nothing expensive or flashy, just something presentable. I scheduled a haircut at a budget salon. Nothing that would draw attention but enough to look put together. I wanted to look exactly like what they expected. A struggling woman trying her best with limited resources. The day before Thanksgiving, I did something I had never done before. I took a screenshot of my portfolio balance, $12.2 million, displayed clearly on my phone screen with the bank's official app interface. I stared at that screenshot for a long time, knowing it represented more than just money. It represented 5 years of being right about something, when everyone around me insisted I was wrong. It represented the vindication I had never asked for, but perhaps deserved. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of nerves, but because of anticipation. For years, I had watched Bethany perform her superiority at family gatherings, watched my parents enable her cruelty, watched Tyler silently participate in my marginalization. Tomorrow, they would have the chance to show me who they really were, and if they chose to be cruel, they would finally understand exactly what they had been dismissing all these years. I fell asleep with my phone on the nightstand, that screenshot saved and ready, wondering if I would actually need to use it. Thanksgiving dinner started exactly as I had expected it would. I arrived at my parents' house in Scottsdale wearing my simple Target dress and carrying a store-bought pie. Nothing fancy, just something appropriate for someone they believed couldn't afford homemade. Bethany was already there, of course, holding court in the living room and regaling Aunt Patricia with stories of her latest work triumph. "Oh, Jennifer!" Aunt Patricia exclaimed when she saw me. "How nice to see you, dear. Bethany was just telling me about her promotion to senior marketing associate. Isn't that wonderful?" I smiled and nodded, noticing how Bethany's chest puffed out with pride at the mention of her title that came with a whopping $2,000 annual raise. "What about you, Jennifer?" Aunt Patricia continued with the polite curiosity of someone making conversation. "How's work going for you?" Before I could answer, Bethany jumped in with her trademark laugh. "Oh, Aunt Patricia, Jennifer does some kind of freelance thing, very flexible schedule." The way she said flexible schedule made it sound like code for unemployed. "She's still figuring things out, aren't you, Jen?" I shrugged noncommittally. "I'm doing well. Thanks for asking." Dinner proceeded with the usual family dynamics playing out exactly as they had for years. Bethany dominated the conversation with stories about her job, her apartment, her social life, while everyone listened with rapt attention. Tyler talked about his new position at a local bank, clearly proud of his steady salary and benefits package. My parents beamed with pride at their 2 successful children, occasionally glancing at me with that familiar mixture of concern and disappointment. "Jennifer's been very quiet tonight," my father observed during the main course. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" "I'm fine, Dad. Just enjoying listening to everyone's updates." Bethany seized the opening like a shark smelling blood in the water. "You know, I was thinking earlier about how different we all are. I mean, Tyler's got his banking career taking off. I'm climbing the ladder in marketing. And then there's Jennifer with her, whatever it is she does." She laughed, but there was an edge to it that made the table shift uncomfortably. "Bethany," my mother said with mild reproach, though her tone suggested she found the comment more amusing than offensive. "What?" "I'm not being mean. I'm just saying we're all at different places in life. Some of us are building careers and contributing to society, and others are still trying to find their path. There's nothing wrong with that." But her smirk told a different story. The conversation moved on, but I could feel the familiar pattern building. Bethany was working up to one of her performances, the kind where she positioned herself as the successful sister and me as the cautionary tale. I had seen it dozens of times before, and usually I just endured it quietly until I could escape home. But not tonight. Tonight, I found myself paying attention to every word, cataloging every slight, every assumption, every moment of casual cruelty. When Bethany complained about her student loan payments, I noted that they were only $300 a month, less than I typically spent on a single cryptocurrency purchase. When Tyler mentioned his salary increase to $38,000 annually, I calculated that my portfolio had gained more than that in interest over the past month. As we moved into dessert, I could see Bethany gearing up for her grand finale. She had that look in her eyes, that predatory gleam that meant she was about to say something particularly cutting. I straightened in my chair and made sure my phone was easily accessible in my purse. Let her make her move, I thought. Let's see exactly who you really are. The moment arrived with the coffee service, exactly as I had predicted it would. Bethany had been building up to it all evening, dropping little comments here and there, testing the waters and gauging the room's reaction. Now, with everyone relaxed and full from dinner, she was ready to deliver her masterpiece of humiliation. "You know what I love about these family gatherings?" Bethany began, her voice taking on that theatrical quality she used when she wanted to command attention. "It's how we can all be honest with each other. Like, really honest." She looked around the table with mock sincerity. "I mean, we're family. If we can't tell each other the truth, who can?" I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach. But this time it was different. This time, I wasn't dreading what was coming. I was ready for it. "The truth is," Bethany continued, her eyes landing on me with laser focus, "some of us have really figured life out, and others are still struggling with the basics, and there's no shame in that. I mean, look at Jennifer." She gestured toward me like I was an exhibit in a museum. "She's 29 years old and still can't figure out how to build a real career or contribute to society in any meaningful way." The table went quiet. Aunt Patricia looked uncomfortable. Tyler stared at his coffee cup. My parents exchanged glances but didn't intervene. They never did when Bethany went on these tirades. "I've been thinking about it all evening," Bethany pressed on, clearly energized by the attention. "Jennifer shows up here in clothes that probably came from a thrift store, driving that ancient car, living in that tiny apartment. She doesn't contribute to conversations about careers or success because she literally has nothing to contribute. She's like a cautionary tale." She paused dramatically, savoring the moment. I could see she wasn't done yet. "I mean, let's be completely honest here. She's worthless. She can't even afford this dinner." The words hung in the air like poison gas. If Mom and Dad hadn't cooked tonight, Jennifer would be eating ramen noodles alone in her apartment because she literally cannot afford to feed herself properly. The laughter started immediately. Tyler chuckled nervously. Aunt Patricia gave an uncomfortable giggle. My parents tried to look disapproving but couldn't hide their amusement. Bethany beamed with satisfaction, clearly delighted with her performance. "Bethany, that's enough," my mother said half-heartedly, but she was still smiling. "What? I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just pointing out reality. Some people are built for success and others—" She gestured vaguely in my direction. "Others are built for dependency. There's nothing wrong with that. Society needs people at every level. Jennifer's just never going to be the type of person who builds wealth or achieves anything significant. And that's okay." The laughter continued, and I felt that familiar burning in my chest that came from being humiliated by people who claimed to love me. But this time, instead of wanting to disappear, I felt something else entirely. A cold, clean rage that sharpened my focus and steadied my hands. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The movement was so casual that no one paid attention to it at first. I opened my banking app, waited for it to load completely, and then did something I had been planning for weeks but had hoped I wouldn't need to do. I paused for exactly 30 seconds, letting Bethany's words fully sink in for everyone at the table. Then I unlocked my phone screen, placed it face up on the white tablecloth, and slid it slowly across the table until it came to rest directly in front of my sister. The laughter died instantly. $12,217,436. The number glowed on my phone screen in the banking app's crisp digital font, impossible to fake and unmistakably real. The Chase Bank logo at the top of the screen confirmed its authenticity, and the timestamp showed it was current as of today. Silence stretched across the dining room like a physical force. Bethany stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The color drained from her face so completely that for a moment I wondered if she might actually faint. Aunt Patricia leaned forward in her chair, squinting at the phone as if she couldn't trust her eyes. Tyler's coffee cup was frozen halfway to his lips, his expression one of complete bewilderment. My parents sat perfectly still, their gazes moving from the phone to my face and back again, processing what they were seeing. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of my father's old clock on the mantelpiece, counting off the seconds in what felt like the longest minute of my life. This can't be real, Bethany finally whispered, her voice barely audible. Where did you get this money? The question came out strangled, desperate, as if she could somehow will the numbers to be fake if she just demanded an explanation loudly enough. I leaned back in my chair, feeling calmer than I had in years. I got it the same way anyone gets money, Bethany. I earned it. My voice was steady and quiet, but it carried clearly across the silent room. I invested in cryptocurrency starting 5 years ago. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Chainlink, Solana, and about 20 other projects that you've probably never heard of. That's impossible, Tyler said, finally finding his voice. You can't just... Cryptocurrency isn't... People don't actually make millions from that stuff. He looked to our parents as if they could somehow confirm that this was all an elaborate joke. I reached across the table and picked up my phone, checking the balance one more time before turning the screen toward the rest of the table. Actually, quite a few people have made millions from cryptocurrency. You just have to know what you're looking at and be willing to take calculated risks. I started small, I continued, watching their faces as the reality continued to sink in. $500 here, $1,000 there. While you were all laughing at my weird hobby, I was building a portfolio that's now worth more than all of your annual salaries combined. For the next 5 years. Bethany's hands were shaking now. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old car. Your clothes. She gestured helplessly at my simple dress. My apartment costs $800 a month and meets all my needs. My car is reliable and paid off. My clothes are comfortable and functional. I paused, letting that sink in. I don't need to impress anyone or prove anything through my possessions. Apparently that was a good strategy, since it let me reinvest every spare dollar while you were all busy judging my lifestyle choices. Aunt Patricia cleared her throat awkwardly. Jennifer, dear, I had no idea you were doing so well for yourself. That's really quite impressive. Thank you, Aunt Patricia. It's been an interesting journey. I looked directly at Bethany, who seemed to be struggling to form words. You mentioned earlier that some people are built for success, and others are built for dependency. I've been thinking about that. My parents finally found their voices. Jennifer, why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, her tone completely different from the pitying condescension she had used earlier in the evening. Would you have believed me if I had? I asked simply. Or would you have assumed I was lying or exaggerating or somehow confused about my own bank balance? The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer. Bethany suddenly stood up from the table, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This doesn't change anything, she said, her voice rising with desperation. Money doesn't make you a better person. It doesn't erase the fact that you've been avoiding real responsibility your entire adult life. I nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right, Bethany. Money doesn't make me a better person. But it does make me financially independent, which means I never have to sit through another dinner where someone calls me worthless for entertainment. Bethany's reputation as the family success story crumbled within weeks when extended family members learned about the Thanksgiving incident, with cousins and aunts sharing stories of how she had publicly humiliated her millionaire sister while living off their parents' financial support. The social embarrassment was compounded when people realized Bethany had been bragging about her $45,000 salary and modest apartment while mocking a sister worth $12 million, making her appear both foolish and cruel to everyone who had witnessed years of her condescending behavior. My parents faced their own reckoning when other family members questioned how they had raised one daughter to be so spiteful toward another, especially when their disappointment had achieved more financial success than the rest of the family combined, forcing them to confront their own poor judgment and favoritism in ways that damaged their reputation as wise, fair parents. The family dynamic never recovered from that Thanksgiving revelation, as I maintained polite but distant relationships with people who had shown me their true character through years of casual cruelty and dismissal. Bethany's attempts to rebuild bridges were met with my simple observation that someone who would publicly call their sister worthless for entertainment was probably not someone I needed in my life, regardless of apologies or changed circumstances. I moved to San Diego 6 months later, buying a beautiful home overlooking the ocean, and found peace in surrounding myself with people who valued character over appearances and kindness over performance. As I watched the sunset from my new deck, I reflected on how Bethany's cruelty had ultimately given me the greatest gift of all: the clarity to see that some people's opinion of my worth said far more about them than it ever did about me.